Welcome to WYCD Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do. It's your old pal Jake, and we got a kind of a wide palette of things today, but all of them involve the American political system. Yes, we have been on an America kick, and yes, we've been hyper-focused on politics and the Department of Justice. But in fairness, that is of concern, I think, to the world, because America is just bipolar at the moment, I think would be a fair way to describe it. We have the Louisville police racism on full display. TYT hits them hard and fairly. A J6 suspect demanding sensitive documents from the government because they're representing themselves in court. I cannot, even if you are a lawyer, recommend against that enough, which is why I'm delighted this person is doing that. No, I like justice. I like a clean fight no matter what. I wish they wouldn't do that. One of Trump's former lawyers hit with dire news, and we're also doing an excerpt from Ellie Honig's book Untouchable, talking about why the lawyer was allowed to represent both Trump and somebody who could theoretically have testified against Donald Trump. And then, if we can get to 15 likes, the Midas Touch has posted a glorious video of Rhode Island Democratic Representative David Cicilline shredding Matt Gaetz, and you'll love to see it. Let's get cracking. Yeah. So the Louisville Police Department is facing pressure right now because Merrick Garland has spoken out against them, to his credit. This is in regards to an investigation into the department following the death of Breonna Taylor. Let's have a look at the Young Turks discussing this recently with a new host joining John Idarola, who I'm not familiar with. So I'm excited to see if they are good. It's the Young Turks, so usually they are. Let's find out.
Some officers have demonstrated disrespect for the people they are sworn to protect. Some have videotaped themselves throwing drinks at pedestrians from their cars, insulted people with disabilities, and called black people monkeys, animal, and boy. This conduct is unacceptable.
As, of course, Merrick Garland announcing the DOJ releasing a 90-page report summarizing what they've found in their multi-year investigation into Louisville police that was launched in the wake of the tragic killing of Breonna Taylor back in March of 2020. And what they found, as you can already tell from that video, is absolutely devastating. The broad conclusions are incredibly worrying. Some of the specific things that they've uncovered are horrifying. It was pervasive. There were individually horrific acts, and there was a tolerance for discrimination, bias in how policing was done, brutality, insults, racial slurs. Pretty much everything you would not want to see in law enforcement was on offer daily with the Louisville police. And we're gonna jump into some of the most individually horrific acts of brutality that you might not already be familiar with. We're gonna turn to that in just a bit. But Sharon, I wanted to start off with you. What do you make of what they found in this investigation of Louisville?
It's sick. Dogs biting people after they've already been subdued. The Attorney General mentioned some of the other things. I will say this, I applaud and appreciate that the system is going to be held, in quotes, accountable here. But I do think the individuals who conduct and persecute and harm people also. We really did not see that with Breonna Taylor. It's slap on the wrist, so minimal, some receiving awards and praise. And so when the Attorney General says the word disrespect, I shouldn't be coming after him when there's so many other people to come after, but I do.
I want to jump in to say I understand that exact frustration. It's really difficult when there is so much wrong to address people who aren't sufficiently helping. If you can imagine that there's a fire burning, and it's burning down a house next door to you, and the fire department shows up, and they've got like little plastic buckets, like a kid would make a sandcastle with. That's what they've got, and they're full of water, and they're sloshing it on the house, and then they run out of water, and the fire is not dealt with, and so they go to fill up from a hose, like a house hose, those buckets again. That's what it feels like watching, the federal level Justice Department say, we disapprove of these racist cops. Can you imagine being a black person and hearing that reaction to what is essentially a town run by thugs, organized crime? I mean, if assaulting innocent people is a crime, and they are a group which does it regularly and collects a paycheck for this behavior, folks, that's organized crime. And there's a stern talking to. It's not sufficient. On the other hand, I can't believe it's a breath of fresh air, because used to be that the fire department never even showed up to your neighbor's house. So, I mean, it feels impossible. The good news is it's not. We have learned, particularly over the last decade, that public pressure has a huge impact on this. And so much of the depressing behavior that goes on within our government does so simply because these people are operating off the belief that nobody's watching it. So, a little hint as to what you can do. Make sure they know you see them.
It's beyond disrespect, and we need to call it what it is. It is looking at some as subhuman. Although I don't know that animals would be treated the way the police treat some people who happen to be black and brown, disabled, you mentioned. So I have mixed feelings. I want, John, the system held accountable, but I want to see the mugshots and the perp walks. And in this case, I am for more policing of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think hopefully for most people, we're way beyond anybody like buying this few bad apples thing or whatever.
Thank you.
But often, like we have this investigation. So I have some mixed feelings. I don't know if they're the exact same as yours, but it's like, oh, good. So now we have an administration that will actually launch these sorts of investigations. Under Trump, this would be either quashed or like stopped in its infancy. They weren't interested for 4 years in looking into these sorts of abuses. But then like you have the investigation. Okay, good, that's good. And they found a lot of this stuff, which is absolutely awful. And like now I'm wondering, so good, they'll get rid of some of those cops, and who will replace them? And that's Louisville.
And what will happen to those cops? What will happen to the ones that get fired, but they didn't outright commit a crime? What if we find out some of those cops used the N-word and they get fired for that? It's not a crime to use the N-word. It's just despicable. There is no federal database for corrupt cops. There ought to be. Any American should be able to call on the police with confidence. We don't live in that America right now. The way to change that is a federal database of corrupt cops. If you get fired as a cop, every department around the country should be able to enter your name and social security number when you fill out an employment application and see, no. This person got canned, and we can't, for being a straight up racist. That means any black people who are in our town that have a crime committed against them won't be able to trust us. And we can't deny that we know this about this cop. We can't later say, oh, we got all these complaints, 15 years of complaints from black citizens, and we had no idea that he came to our department from Mississippi in the 50s, essentially. Federal database. That's a major change we have to get done.
One individual spot. Just yesterday on the Young Turks, we were talking about some of the new reporting on gangs in the LA Sheriff's Office. And it's just like every place across all of these states, across literally decades. It is like the word systemic is too small at a certain point. Like the size of the issue that we face, the difficulty in even trying to conceive of how you would reform something that is so fundamentally rotten at every single level, going back since before we were born. It's like, even when we get the results of an investigation like this, it's like pretty disheartening.
Yeah, it is. And it's partnering with your abuser. These consent decree, we're going into business with the very people who couldn't get it right deliberately in the first place. Why not sign a presidential order that takes away any of their money? They're getting federal dollars. Take away their money. Replace them with, if you must, something that has more oversight from the administration. And some would say, oh, well, this is a takeover. It's not really. It's not really.
That's an excellent idea, by the way. That is an excellent idea. Absolutely take away their money, their federal dollars, because they have proven that that is not a good way to spend that money. It's that simple. That money is going to fund a criminal organization, at the very least, a racist organization, an organization that permits systematic racism. That means don't fund that system. That's, to me, a layup.
And I think that the people who live there should understand that there could be a sea change, an administration change. And like you said, just like the one before, here we go again. It's the system itself that is designed to attack those who are most vulnerable.
Yeah, and you also wonder, so they'll identify the people that did these individual things. And in a moment, we're gonna launch into one or two of them. And then who will remain? Like, one would hope, well, the good cops, I guess, or people who, maybe they'll lose some of their coworkers that they have experience with, but they take pride in being cops, so they want the police to be the best that they can be. No, that's not what it is. Like, they leave behind people who are incredibly resentful of how rude it was that you would look into their behavior. People who want this stuff to continue. They may not pop up in this reporting or whatever, but they don't have an actual problem with it. And this is why, even when we fight so hard to move the population and the population to get the right sorts of population or politicians elected to, for instance, launch new gun regulations or something like that, some sort of gun control. And then the police in multiple states are just like, no, we're not gonna do that. And who is the oversight body on that? Maybe Merrick Garland launches an investigation that 3 years later is like, well, it turns out that they were refusing to do what they were constitutionally bound to do. Great, that's awesome. And so again, it just gets to.
In other words, there's no consequences. It's the same thing we see time and time again, particularly with right-wing corruption. Of course, they don't act ethically, because they have never existed in a system where there is a punishment for that. In fact, they seem to take it for granted. I don't know why they wouldn't, that this is how they're supposed to act. When people talk about how cops come from the American police department, the American police system comes from slave patrols, this is what they're alluding to. It has been systematic, and if we don't make consequences for that sort of behavior, there is nothing that will stop it from continuing.
The last person to give you a solution to this problem, I have no idea. But it is just such a deep problem, and it is not just about police training or particular outcomes of, when they go out there. It's the culture of policing, it's the training, it's the police unions, it's the politicians who are protecting them, the relationships that they have with, with prosecutors and all that. It's just such a deep foundational issue.
Yeah, and it's like, we just saw it in the Nichols case, right? You had a black police chief who surely had direct communication with a mayor about bringing crime down. And I'll close my eyes and put blinders on to the way in which you do it. And a man who was just trying to get a few feet to his mother's house is beaten to death. So, and you know who else is left behind, John? Who's left behind are the people who look the other way. You want to talk about, just a few bad apples. What about, you have to win the hearts and minds. That's like on any job. You have most of the people in the middle, then some real leadership, and then you have people over here who mean no good. There's a war for who's going to win the room. And it's like that in police departments and cities. And so there's got to be a greater initiative, a greater way to use perhaps people and how they perform and what they believe and change hearts and minds. Now, you said it's a heavy lift to reform police. I don't know how you do that, okay? I don't know how you win hearts and minds of people who have privilege and who have always gotten away with it or who look the other way. But that's what needs to be done here. They're not gonna take them by force.
Yeah.
So there's a number of things we can do here. Let's talk about the immediate, the medium term, and the long term. What you can do immediately is contact your representative with the link provided in the description and demand a federal database of corrupt cops. This will prevent the sorts of people that get fired for being racist scumbags that should have never been given a badge in the first place. It will prevent them from being able to wander on over to the next department and do their same despicable, corrupt policing. This will also incentivize decent cops. If you will have spent, for example, 25 years on the same police force, guess what that is going to mean about you? You did in these days. It'll mean that your community possibly trusts you. But if you just say, I've been a cop for 25 years, there's a whole segment of our population which will be like, where were you a cop? Was it always here? Have they been moving you around like a Catholic priest? Federal database of corrupt cops. That is the short-term solution. Medium-term solution. March with Black Lives Matter. Sign up for their mailing list so you can get notified. Join the Black Lives chapter in your state so you know when there is a march in your area that you can realistically join. When, not if. But just like school shootings in this country, because we have not solved the structural problems, when the next American is killed unjustly by the police, march with Black Lives Matter. Long term, vote as left as you can. Vote for policy that will give an economic voice to the black community. Sign up, in my opinion, for the Democratic Socialists of America. Consider donating to them if you don't want to outright join the group. In America, we can use its own corruption against it. And if black people economically are doing better, we can use the fact that it is harder in America to abuse the rich or even the middle class than it is for them, for the American system to abuse the poor. As many black people as we can lift out of poverty, as we can, that will be, this is poorly phrased, if we can lift as many black people as we can out of poverty, that will be a group that we can worry about less. Not at all, but less. It will be a layer of insulation, I suppose, against this hatred. And hopefully, you get enough black folks intermingling in the suburbs. We keep the internet being a relatively free place. People see more black faces. Not so strange to them. Hopefully, the hate will die with familiarity. Well, we have a Jan 6 suspect demanding that he be given access to sensitive documents. Let's have a look at that. This is from the Kansas City Star. A Topeka man charged in connection with the Capitol riot is asking a federal judge to order the government to turn over sensitive material that he says shows undercover officers inciting protesters. Do recall the projection present in GOP accusations. William Pope, whose charges include 2 felonies, has filed a series of motions asking U.S. District Judge Rudolph Contreras to compel the government to provide him with documents he says he is entitled to have because he is acting as his own attorney. Good God, not advised. The government is violating his rights, Pope argues, by failing to give him full access to the discovery material and release documents deemed sensitive and highly sensitive that he says show police encouraging protesters to breach the Capitol on January 6th. I want to remind you, not that I think you've forgotten, but just so we can highlight the oddity of this request. I want to remind you that police physically fought with those protesters to keep them out. In addition, after they lost the fight, they then tried to direct protesters in a way that steered them away from Congress. Exercising my constitutional right to represent myself as the officer of the court in my own case necessitates that I have full access to discovery. Oh, this guy. Pope said in a recent motion, the government's opposition to granting me full discovery access denies me due process and creates an undue burden, limiting my ability to adequately confront witnesses and accusations. Attorneys representing the Jan 6 defendants are given full access to the discovery databases, thank you, in order to prepare a defense, Pope said. The same access, he said, should be available to defendants acting as their own attorneys, except it is called exculpatory evidence, and they absolutely turn that over. A hearing in this case is scheduled for Friday in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. The debate over the release of the Capitol security footage from Jan 6 intensified last month when, oh, here we go again, when House Speaker Kevin McCarthy faced criticism, rightly so, that's my own editorial, for granting Fox News host Tucker Carlson exclusive access to view more than 40,000 hours of video. On Tuesday, McCarthy said he would soon make access available to the broader public and to lawyers of defendants, good Lord, charged in connection with the insurrection. Think about the thing they're charged with and ask yourself if you want them having unfettered access to the layout of the Capitol building. I don't. In Pope's case, the government argues that he should not have access to the discovery because of concerns about national security. Yes, and privacy interfering with the investigation. Do remember that yesterday we talked about Joseph Hutchinson, who was also acting as his own attorney. And he also used that to get special treatment from the court. He said he wanted to go see another defendant, a friend of his, as a matter of fact, somebody he was at the riot with, apparently. What did they do? Well, the reason he said he wanted to see that case is so he could see how it was done. And the judge let him. I mean, he said he wanted to see how the case played out so he could prepare his own defense. And the judge allowed him to do that despite the fact that they were both accused of violent crimes against police. Think about this. Would a gang member be allowed to go be in the vicinity of another gang member during their trial? Guess what they did? They fled. Another compatriot of theirs already fled the country and is living in Belarus. I wouldn't recommend the judge trust these particular cats. The government said Pope already has access to some body-worn camera footage, there we go, and U.S. Capitol Police surveillance video, and is allowed to view discovery under the supervision of an officer of the court, an actual one. He may possess materials that are marked sensitive, it said, as long as they are secured and in a safe place and are used solely in connection with his case. Pope's objections to the proposed solutions, the government said, are not rooted in concern with building his defense. Yeah, I should say not. But rather in a desire to engage in a fishing expedition. Don't give this guy nothing. It seems unadvisable. Let's talk about what you can do. Well, look, the thing to do on this one, just watch your local news or follow your local news and stay on the lookout for major January 6 cases in your area. If you see something like this, if you're, for example, from Topeka, Kansas, and you see something like this, and you see a January 6 defendant actually getting the special treatment they request, just be wary of it. Be ready to make a scene on social media. Be ready to generally make your community know that you see it and you disagree with it, if that is what's going on. The reason for this being, as I stated earlier, so much of the mishandling, so much of the kid gloves given to these folks happen as a result of the powers that be thinking we're not paying attention. So our priority has to be to make it clear that we are paying attention. The easiest way to keep track of this, so that you're not swamped with all kinds of J6 things that are ultimately going to be irrelevant to you, keep an eye, keep a hairy eye on your local news. And here's the important thing. If you find that there is a mishandling of a case, contact local news stations in your area and make sure they're planning on talking about it. That has a massive, one or two people contacting the local news stations has a massive impact on what they cover. And if it looks like they're failing to cover a January 6th piece of corruption, contact them and say, Channel 7 did this last night. When are you guys going to talk about it? Makes a difference. Oh, there we are. So a Trump lawyer has been hit with dire news. It's what you never want to hear if you are a lawyer. It's that prosecutors are looking at them, the lawyer. Here is the legal breakdown with Brian Tyler Cohen and Glenn Kirshner telling you about it.
You're watching the legal breakdown. So Glenn, we have some major news here about another Trump-aligned lawyer. That's Stefan Passantino. He's now at risk of being disbarred. Can you explain what happened here?
So this lawyer, Stefan Passantino, who used to work for the Trump White House, at one point was hired, but not by Cassidy Hutchinson to represent Cassidy Hutchinson, but was hired by Trump World, a Trump-aligned PAC, to swoop in and not so much represent Cassidy Hutchinson's interest, but to basically try to protect Donald Trump's interest. And what I can tell you, Brian, is one of the cardinal sins as a lawyer is you are duty bound to represent your client's interests and represent them zealously. You can never have even dual loyalties to somebody else where you're representing the interests of somebody else. And what became apparent through the reporting and through Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony before the J6 committee is Stan Passantino was hired by Trump World to protect Donald Trump.
Now, is it legal for a lawyer, namely Passantino, to pressure a client to remain loyal to Trump, who's a third party in all of this, versus just telling the truth during her testimony? Like, according to Hutchinson, Passantino's advice was to say as little to the panel as possible, and that was accompanied by assurances that she would get, quote, a really good job in Trump World.
Yeah, it's a great question because some of what Passantino did was perhaps simply unethical, but then other things that he did that we now know he did because of Hutchinson's testimony were pretty clearly illegal. So part of what
I do want to, just to get the larger point, it is not illegal for Passantino to represent both Trump and Hutchinson, in case he doesn't clarify that here. That part is not illegal. However, not representing Cassidy Hutchinson's interests primarily when he is dealing with Cassidy Hutchinson, that is illegal. And encouraging her to do illegal things, that's real illegal.
What he did is, for example, when Cassidy Hutchinson said, look, I'm very close with Tony Ornato, and Tony told me that Trump tried to strangle the limo driver when he refused to take him to the Capitol. And Cassidy Hutchinson said, her lawyer, Stefan Passantino, said, no, we're not going to talk about that. We need to focus on protecting Donald Trump. That will make an ethical lawyer's head explode, because to directly answer your question, he was suborning perjury. He was urging Cassidy Hutchinson not to testify fully and truthfully to the J6 committee. That is suborning perjury. That is obstructing an official congressional proceeding. It is potentially contempt of Congress. You know, there are a whole host of criminal offenses that I actually believe, based on what we learned through Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony, Jack Smith must be digging into and considering charging Stefan Passantino criminally. Of course, today we're talking about the fact that a group of prominent lawyers are seeking to have him investigated and ultimately disbarred for being an unethical lawyer.
Okay, here's...
At a minimum, I would hope this guy gets disbarred. Frankly, anybody that was willing to represent Trump under the terms that appeared to be required, which were just facilitating lawbreaking, you gotta, I would say at a minimum, that's what ought to happen.
What I'm having trouble wrapping my head around, I guess, on the legality front, how is it okay for a lawyer who's representing his client, who's Cassidy Hutchinson here, but also whose legal fees were paid for by a different client, and that is Trump's super PAC, as you mentioned, or Trump's political action committee, to basically harm his first client for the benefit of that third party? Like,
the harm is not legal, but the representation of those two interests, that is legal, and that should be illegal.
Harm Hutchinson, because this is going to do harm to her, all in deference to Trump. Like, how is that okay just in legal world?
It's not okay in legal world. And I think that's why you see this complaint that was just filed with the DC bar, signed by, I think, 35 prominent lawyers. They are past presidents of the DC bar, past presidents of the American Bar Association, you know, some of our nation's best legal scholars. They are former attorneys general from various states. I mean, these are, you know, heavy hitters in the legal circles. It's not only not okay, some of what he did may very well be criminal. Now, when you talk about what happens if somebody else is paying your legal fees, that's fine. Listen, if I'm in trouble and somebody else wants to pay my attorney's fees, they can do that as long as they fully disclose it to me, and as long as I am assured that regardless of where the money's coming from, the lawyer is only looking out for my interest. But that was not what Stefan Passantino was doing. He was being paid by Trump World, and he was looking out for the interests of Donald Trump. And here's how it came to a head in one of the ugliest ways, Brian. At one point, Cassidy Hutchinson was advised by Passantino, you know what? Why don't you just consider defying the congressional subpoena? First of all, that is urging a lawyer to have the client commit the crime of contempt of Congress. But here's the kicker. Passantino.
You meant to say that's a lawyer urging the client, but yes, that instructing her to commit a crime. Wow.
Told Cassidy Hutchinson, you know what? Mark Meadows defied a congressional subpoena. Dan Scavino defied a congressional subpoena, and they never got indicted for contempt of Congress. So
steal that money. You can get away with it. Lawyer can't say that. I'm just saying as an example. A lawyer cannot advise or legally cannot advise that you commit a crime.
Advising you as your lawyer to do the same. A lawyer cannot advise a client to commit a crime. But, that illustrates, one, just how unethical Passantino was, and two, just how damaging it is when the Department of Justice decides to forego bringing criminal charges against high government officials like Meadows and Scavino when they inarguably committed the crime of contempt of Congress.
Exactly. This is why it matters that we pursue every crime. This is why I did that entire stream listing all of Trump's crimes and the ones we have already let him get away with because the statute of limitations passed. This is why it's important that we pursue these charges about the fake electors at the state level as well as the federal level. I would rather see there be hiccups in these cases because prosecutors are stumbling over themselves to get charges than what we have seen, which is nothing. We've heard a lot of rumors and that's it. Even in Fulton County, we've yet to actually see an indictment. I would think any prosecutor would want to be in the history books as being the first who was brave enough and righteous enough to indict a corrupt former president. None wants to be. Maybe they don't have the courage. I don't know. Madness to me. If you want to see the rest of this, the link is in the description. It's the legal breakdown. It's fantastic. I'd like you to listen to this to explain what's going on here and to explain how it is both difficult for these prosecutors to get the boss in such a case, in this case represented by Trump, as well as the absolute mafia-like structure of the Trump organization. This is from a book I'm about to play you called Untouchable by Ellie Honig. Link to that in the description as well. This is Ellie Honig reading from it, explaining difficulties he used to have prosecuting mob bosses.
The phenomenon of House counsel was so predictable that we'd sometimes play this parlor game around it. Anytime we were preparing for a takedown, I'd try to predict which defense lawyers we'd see in court the next morning to represent the newly arrested mobsters. I wouldn't get them all, but usually I'd accurately predict a solid majority, sometimes to the astonishment of younger prosecutors. How'd I pull off this little prosecutorial Nostradamus routine? Easy. I knew it was all about power and money, and the bosses had both. If we had, say, 21 Gambino defendants, as in Russo's case, I'd tick off the names of about that many defense lawyers we knew to be House lawyers, those who understood how the game was played, who would take the money from the bosses, sometimes funneled through other sources, usually without asking too many questions, and who understood that their true mission was to keep their less powerful clients from breaking rank and talking.
When he says house lawyers, he's referring to what was like Stefantino, what was just described. Somebody who is hired by the boss and knows that they are in business with the boss above everyone else, who represents primarily the interest of the boss, and who makes it difficult for prosecutors to flip witnesses, to flip other criminals. I shouldn't say flip witnesses, but to flip lesser criminals who can point to the boss and say, that's the boss of a criminal organization. Well, their attorney is controlled by the boss.
So despite his apparent interest in cooperating, Russo was essentially blocked. If he told his lawyer he wanted to cooperate, word would quickly reach the top of the family with potentially dire consequences. Russo understood that, so he tried a back-channel approach. Just as the Gambino family powers that be funded Russo's lawyer to try to keep him in line, Trump used campaign money to protect himself in ongoing criminal matters. The Trump campaign and associated political entities used tens of millions of dollars in donations to pay for lawyers who represented potential witnesses in criminal investigations relating to Trump, including Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, Hope Hicks, and Corey Lewandowski, all of whom witnessed potential criminality by Trump, according to the Mueller report. Trump campaign funds also covered legal fees for his advisor Boris Epshteyn and bodyguard Keith Schiller, both of whom gave testimony favorable to Trump in the House's investigation of Russian election interference. Trump deployed the cash reserves of his private business, the Trump Organization, to similar effect. According to Michael Cohen, the corporation picked up legal fees for Eric Trump, longtime Trump Organization Chief Financial Officer Alan Weisselberg, and Controller Jeffrey McConney, among others.
Are you sensing a pattern? Who flipped and who didn't?
In its fraud investigation, the Manhattan District Attorney targeted and tried to flip Weisselberg and McConney in particular, given their familiarity with the inner financial workings of the Trump Organization. Prosecutors ultimately charged Weisselberg with fraud, and while he agreed to cooperate against the Trump Organization as a corporate entity, he refused to cooperate against Trump or any other individual. And prosecutors granted immunity to McConney by compelling him to testify in a state grand jury, though his testimony didn't hurt Trump badly enough to result in an indictment.
They should be commended, though, for taking a whack at it.
The Manhattan DA, left without an effective insider witness who could directly tie the organization's frauds to Trump himself, ultimately declined to indict him. The state attorney general eventually filed a civil lawsuit alleging fraud, but no criminal charges. Cohen's saga nicely illustrates the implicit bargain. He told me in an interview for this book, quote, Donald would never part with $1 from his own pocket. He'd pay for lawyers using campaign money, Trump Organization money, insurance. It was the ultimate piggy bank. Cohen further described Trump's methodology for keeping his confidants beholden to him. Quote, he'd always be a step or two behind on payments, miss the payment for the first month, then make a partial payment in the second month, Cohen explained. Before you know it, you're so deep in legal fees that you can't stop and you need his money to get out of the hole. That financial pressure to rely on Trump's largesse had the practical effect of preventing people from cooperating, lest they lose Trump's financial backing and meet a fate like Cohen's. When the Mueller investigation began, and before Cohen gave any public indication that he might flip, Trump used campaign funds and Trump Organization money to pay over $1.7 million for Cohen's attorney fees.
He doesn't talk about it here, and I don't have the answer. But the question I'm wondering is that yet another crime? It feels like it ought to be if it's not. And the statute of limitations, I don't think would have expired. But that seems awfully corrupt.
But when the FBI executed a search warrant on Cohen's office and home in April 2018, it suddenly seemed that he might get arrested, the ultimate incentive to flip. At first, Trump tried the sweet talk approach. He called Cohen a good person.
Withdrawn, it would have expired 5 years. Damn it.
And a great guy on Fox News. And he tweeted that Cohen was a fine person with a wonderful family who I have always liked and respected. adding that he did not think Cohen would flip, wink, wink. Less visible to the public in the immediate aftermath of the search warrant, but perhaps more resonant, Trump also made a payment of over $48,000 to Cohen's legal team. Cohen eventually did provide information about Trump to prosecutors and Congress, of course. Trump quickly turned against him, and the money dried up. In an effort to recoup some of his attorney fees, Cohen sued the Trump Organization for $1.9 million in outstanding legal costs that he claimed he was owed as a former employee, alleging that Trump cut him off because he cooperated in violation of the Trump Organization's original contractual promise to cover his legal fees. But a New York state judge dismissed Cohen's lawsuit in November 2021, and Cohen was stuck with his own massive legal bill. Only the wealthiest and most powerful people can reach the level of the mob boss, or Trump, who can pay not only for his own legal team, but also for lawyers to represent other people who need to be kept in line. While Cohen managed to break away, he did so only at great financial and personal cost. And very few people have the independent financial means and the straight-up chutzpah of a Michael Cohen.
Now imagine you're some kid. You're in your 20s. You're working at the White House, already a daunting thing. And you have to try to find the bravery to testify, in essence, in front of national television cameras against the president, former, of the United States.
Making it difficult.
I don't think Cassidy Hutchinson, I'm not going to go too hard against her. I don't think she's necessarily an innocent, because she chose to take that job to further her own career, knowing damn well what a foul person Donald Trump was. But she must be commended for her bravery in the January 6th committee.
Or impossible to cut the financial leash and cooperate against the boss. Trump similarly used the power of the purse strings to selectively pay for counsel for potential witnesses in the House of Representatives' January 6 Select Committee's probe. American Conservative Union Chairman Matt Schlapp confirmed to CNN in January 2022 that his organization had raised over 7 figures from donors and that he was in communication with Trump's team about who would receive assistance from this pot of money to pay for legal fees.
Just a reminder for those that haven't been following that particular piece of news, this is the same Matt Schlapp who is accused of sexually assaulting a campaign staffer for Herschel Walker.
Trump reportedly was more than aware of this fund and encouraged people to make use of it. Schlapp openly admitted, bragged even, that the money was reserved for those who stonewalled the committee. We are certainly not going to assist anyone who agrees with the mission of the committee and is aiding and abetting the committee, he told CNN. The deal was right out in the open. Trump might authorize payment for your attorneys, but only if you keep quiet.
Listen to that language, aiding and abetting. Aiding and abetting. A congressional committee. Yeah, you should aid and abet the United States government, absolutely. What is he talking about?
The committee's probe hit its stride during the summer of 2022, when it held a series of public hearings that revealed explosive evidence of the effort by Trump and other powerful players to steal the 2020 presidential election. In June 2022, over 13 million people watched on television as Cassidy Hutchinson, a former Trump White House aide, testified that Trump knew some of the people in the crowd at the rally held immediately before the January 6th Capitol attack were armed, that Trump nonetheless directed that mob to the U.S. Capitol, and that Trump wanted desperately to accompany them there. Hutchinson also testified that her former boss, White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, and Trump's personal attorney Rudy Giuliani had sought presidential pardons. Among those in the television viewing audience were Justice Department prosecutors who, seemingly beaten to the punch by the committee, were astonished at Hutchinson's revelations, according to the New York Times. Hutchinson emerged as a star witness for the committee only after she shook loose from her original attorney, Stephen Passantino, a former Trump White House ethics advisor who had been selected and paid for by Trump's Political Action Committee. Hutchinson testified before the committee, behind closed doors, 3 times while Passantino was representing her.
This is the guys All right, this is the guy that Cohen and Kirshner were just talking about. The guy who is now, for this behavior, under investigation himself, it would appear.
But only after she fired Passantino and
or recommended for it, I should say.
Retained independent counsel of her own choosing, former federal prosecutor Jody Hunt, did she come forward with additional damning information and agree to testify publicly. The committee, seemingly wary of losing Hutchinson to the sway of Trump world attorneys again, on June 27th called an emergency hearing, despite having previously declared a 2-week recess to have her testify the next afternoon. Hutchinson was not the only witness who received legal counsel originally paid for by Trump and his allies. The New York Times reported that Trump's political organization and his allies have paid for or promised to finance the legal fees of more than a dozen witnesses called in the congressional investigation into the January 6 attack, raising legal and ethical questions about whether the former president may be influencing testimony with a direct bearing on him.
Just bear in mind, with the evidence they uncovered despite that opposition, they ended up recommending 4 charges. 4 charges for Trump. They aren't even the Department of Justice. They don't even have that level of authority. So don't be sympathetic to Garland, no matter how much people try to tell you, oh, he's doing everything he can. No, a bunch of civilians did a better job.
The Times noted that the episode raised questions about whether Mr. Trump and his allies may, implicitly or explicitly, be pressuring witnesses to hold back crucial information that might incriminate or cast a negative light on the former president. While it's not necessarily illegal for Trump or any third party to recommend a lawyer or to pay for another person's legal fees, the undeniable practical reality is that this makes it more difficult for the recipient to turn against the benefactor. Hutchinson managed to break free despite enormous financial and political pressure to the contrary. But many other potential witnesses over the years took their assigned counsel paid for by Trump and his political organization and either towed the party line or stayed mum altogether. In the broader view, it's not unusual for a company to pay for attorneys for its employees. This happens regularly across industries, and lower-ranking individuals or employees often want the boss or the corporation to pick up their tab for legal expenses, which can run well into the 6 figures in major investigations.
But
as a natural consequence, however, it becomes difficult for those employees to cooperate against their superiors and colleagues or former colleagues, particularly when the employee understands that the benefactor will cease paying his legal fees if he flips. In fact, the Justice Department once formally recognized that witnesses are less likely to cooperate when a corporation is paying their attorney's fees.
before he tells you why that is, see if you can remember in your head the reason why the Justice Department will not indict a sitting president. Is there a law that says they can't?
According to longstanding DOJ policy, when
DOJ policy. They inhibit themselves unnecessarily from going after powerful people, resulting in the image on that book right there. The law not applying to them.
prosecutors were determining whether to bring criminal charges against a corporation, quote, the department reserved the right to consider such payments negatively in deciding whether to assign cooperation credit to a corporation, end quote. In other words, DOJ recognized that it is inherently more difficult for an employee to cooperate with prosecutors when a company pays for that employee's attorneys, and it was formal department policy to discourage and potentially punish this type of arrangement. But in 2008, the Justice Department reversed course, instead declaring that it generally would not penalize companies that paid legal fees for their employees. In announcing the policy change, DOJ declared optimistically that, quote, the department shares a common cause with responsible corporate leaders. We are both committed to promoting the public's trust and security in our capital markets, end quote. The Justice Department enacted this pro-corporation, anti-cooperation policy change through a simple internal memo, which garnered minimal mainstream public attention.
Let me just reiterate what they said. They said, you can trust capitalism. You can trust corporations. We share a common cause with corporations. No, we do not. In fact, we require law enforcement to be as strict as possible against corporations because we already have an uphill battle fighting their financing in court. That is a ridiculous internal memo. And what you can do, I recommend we contact the DOJ and say, rescind that immediately. We've seen with Norfolk Southern the character of these corporations. They don't give a damn about human beings. The DOJ is supposed to. Rescind the memo.
And this permissive policy has been on the books at DOJ ever since. So what can we learn from this? If you're a boss, it's vital to keep your co-conspirators, employees, colleagues, henchmen, what have you, under your thumb to prevent cooperation. One remarkably effective way to do that is by choosing and paying for their lawyers. An unsophisticated boss might resort to open threats against prospective cooperators, but those tactics are obvious and likely to provide evidence of obstruction of justice if discovered by prosecutors. But paying legal fees for others is generally perfectly legal. DOJ is just fine with the practice now, and it can even look charitable on the surface. Few people can afford to pay their own attorney's fees in a major case, and if they're reliant on the boss's money, it becomes difficult to flip. It's a clean, common, and remarkably effective, but often overlooked tactic that the savviest bosses use across industries to protect themselves from prosecution. As the saying goes, take the king's coin, do the king's bidding.
So we don't have to take this lying down, this behavior from our Justice Department. There's a couple of things we can do. Number one, tell your representatives at the state and federal level that you want laws that ban bought lawyers with conflicts of interest. There's a link to find your representatives in the description. I can't recommend it strongly enough. We need to end that practice. That is the practice that put Cassidy Hutchinson in the position of requiring bravery to do her duty. Number two, we can demand that the DOJ reverse its 2008 internal memo decision, or decision via internal memo, preventing corporations from being punished for corrupt attorney practices. The link to contact the Department of Justice, that's available in the description. All you got to do is click on that, fill out the form, and put your opinion in there. And people at the Department of Justice will see that you see them and that you demand a change in how they operate. Use it. Put public pressure on these people. Well, I have enjoyed presenting these, dark though they were, today. I hope you will consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed the stream. This has been WYCD Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do. My name's Jake.